Hello, good evening. Sorry for the delay. We had some slight technical difficulties. There was the platform that we used, the Restream, wouldn't connect to the server. Just managed to do it now. So thank you for bearing with us. And like I said, good evening. Hope you're all well. I see a few people saying evening. So evening to you, Ben. Evening to you, Brad. Evening to you, Robert. Hope you guys are well. I do ask one thing this evening. Please could somebody keep me updated with the score of the Spurs game, because that's my team, and I'm joining you guys for around about half an hour or so, so I'm going to miss the first half an hour. So if you can keep me up to date with the score, that would be much appreciated. We're going to be going through some questions, so please do put some of your questions into the comments. I'm sure there's plenty of them out there. If it's small, big, we'll hopefully try and answer them to the best of our ability. We do have some pre-made questions as always, just in case that the questions don't start filtering through. So we'll kick off with one of those. Richard joins us this evening from the technical helpline. Richard, how's it been? How's the emails? Because I know you're the man when it comes to the emails.
Very busy at the moment. We seem to be getting lots of questions in. Lots on the private rented sector. Lots on the EICR codings and the usual sort of bunch of questions. Yeah,
I know
so very busy.
I know we've closed our helpline down for the general public, and it's for members only at the moment, and the high priority list. Is that having a toll and a bit of an effect? So are you getting a few more public questions than you normally would, especially around when we look at the private rented sector and the EICR front?
Yeah, we are getting lots of questions from landlords, letting agencies, those type of people. So yeah, there is a big influx in emails from the general public. So that is having an effect.
Okay. Ben's asked a question here, Richard. He's saying TT earthing system with type 1-2 SPD. SPD will be housed in the consumer unit. Will an MCB be okay, or do we need to fit an RCBO for fault protection due to high ZS?
You wouldn't normally install an RCD on an SPD. It will need a protective device. Sometimes they're internal to the unit and sometimes they're external. So the first thing I would say to you is seek manufacturers' instructions to see whether it needs the additional protective device externally. Mm-hmm. Type 1, Type 2 at the origin, yeah, needs to be a Type 1 if there's a lightning protection system, but for protection against voltage surges on the network, then a Type 2 would be adequate. So no direct requirement for an RCD as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Mike has asked, how does it work with my virtual assessment next month with regards to showing the inspector my handwritten certs? I believe that you'll just simply scan them over for him to see. Is there anything else you want to add on that, Richard?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the process, but what I believe is it's emails, etc., and I believe the engineer will be in touch prior to the assessment, asking you what to provide for him on the day.
Yeah, I have seen a few comments that people have just been literally showing them, when they're doing their virtual assessment on the camera, the inspector's having a quick observation, checking them over. So I'm sure that you'll come to some solution with your assessor. I'm sure he'll be able to clarify with that as well. Someone else has said, following up on the MCB question around SPD, Hager consumer units come with SPD directly off the main switch, whereas others are using MCBs. Should MCB be used? We've just mentioned there, it depends on whether the manufacturer has that internal protection inside the device, or whether they are requiring a separate MCB to protect that device. Anything else on that, Rich?
Yeah, the only thing I would add on that one is the effects of an RCD failure. It should not affect the installation. So it certainly needs its own protective device that will maintain the installation should it fail at end of life failure.
Someone else is asked here saying, when do you expect all domestic houses to be to have SPDs fitted from time of build? I wouldn't imagine that they'll come in anytime soon, because typically, or generally speaking, there's no requirement for them in domestic situations unless, you know, some of either the owner has been explained to about all the benefits of them, and they're saying yes, it's another safety device, so we're gonna fit them. Is there any other reason, really, Rich, that they should be fitting SPDs?
I mean, not aware of any near changes. Obviously, we got Amendment 2 in the pipeline.
Yeah.
It's still out there in the DPC format for public comment. I think when that is finalised, certainly we will have a better picture in the direction of which SPDs are going.
Mm-hmm.
So really, we're in a bit of limbo at the moment and waiting on Amendment 2 for any future changes, should they happen.
I know in the draft for public comment they have cleared up that section around SPDs, or they're trying to clear that section up, should I say, in regards to it being open for draft public comment. They're going on to give it clear guidance to say that it's a conversation really that you need to be having with the owner of the property to whether you should be fitting SPDs or not. So they're saying, actually, does this property warrant these SPDs over, still kind of in the same sense as the value of the SPD against the value of the property, but it gives a little bit more description. If you guys haven't seen it, please do go over to the BSI Standards Development website. You can go on there, just log in as a member, and you can actually have a look at and see the changes that have been proposed. So 11th of December, I believe that's closing, if I'm not mistaken, Richard.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, to summarise that, what you've been saying, I think it's all down to tolerable loss, as to whether the client is prepared to, know the information, know the potential loss, and whether it's tolerable to the client in that respect.
Okay. Let's see what else we've got here. Old install, no mains isolator at the origin. Would this be a code 3?
No mains isolator. Older installations do tend to have more than one means of isolation, or they can do, certainly in the older ones commercially, where you've got a busbar chamber.
Mm-hmm.
The regulations talk about a means of isolation. It doesn't necessarily have to be a single means. So a little bit difficult to answer specifically, but there must be a means of isolation.
Mm-hmm.
That could be more than one, and where it's more than one, it should certainly be suitably labelled to say where the isolation points are. As for a code, well, without a means of isolation, there will be parts of the installation that couldn't be worked on safely.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly a C3, possibly, depending on the details, very open, and the risk, possibly a C2 if there's not an adequate means of isolation.
Dan's asked here, how does it work with if you're new to registering with NIC? Is that a virtual or face-to-face assessment? The guidelines on and around that are changing day to day and from week to week. So the best people to speak to would be the sales team up in Chesterfield. Give them a quick call. They would definitely be able to clear it up and let you know exactly what will happen with the virtual or face-to-face assessment. Hi there. What code? What do you code a cooker circuit's 6mm on a 32 amp MCB with the cooker hood connected directly to it and another radial socket on a 2.5mm cable? I gave it a C2, another spark gave it C3 based on an existing installation for over 10 years. So he's saying here that, Rich, that nothing's happened in 10 years, so he's saying it should be a C3, as where the guy who's asking the question said it should be a C2.
Yeah, I mean, again, I suppose the main area of concern would be potential overload.
Yeah.
Maximum demand for that circuit under its normal circumstances. There is a view there that if it's been there for a substantial period of time and there is no signs of thermal damage, it's a very good indicator that the circuit's not getting overloaded.
Mm-hmm.
I would tend to agree with that philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
That visual inspection or load testing would certainly give me a means to establish whether the circuit is being overloaded. Certainly, if there's signs of overload damage, discolouring of the cables, etc., then a C2. Other than that, probably with no evidence of overload, a C3.
What about it being a fan though, Richard? I know we speak a lot about extract fans in bathrooms.
With the fan, the leg or the branch that feeds the fan can't overload in the respect that it's a fixed load.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if the fan pulled 3 amps, as long as the cable supplying the fan was capable of pulling 3 amps, then it's not going to overload, is it? So where we got a fixed load and our current carrying capacity is greater than the design current of the fixed load, then certainly with respect to overload, we're not going to overload. The difficulty would be more with the socket outlet, because there we don't have a fixed load, and it would depend on what was plugged into it. So with a heavy load, say something like 3 kilowatts, and possibly the cooker, then that would be more likely to overload than the branch supplying the extract fan.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah. If you're using the armouring of your SWA for your means of CPC, what size should the fly lead be of the size of the armour cable? He's asking. Should it be the same size as the...
Good question. Well, the fly lead obviously should be the size required for the CPC of that particular circuit. Where we use the armour, we have to have the copper equivalent. Now, it's quite interesting. It's approximately 8 mil of copper to every 1 mil of, 8 mil of steel to every 1 mil of copper. So if we want a 10 mil CPC, for instance, then we need 80 mil of steel in our SWA to provide the copper equivalent. If that was the case, we would also want a 10 mil fly lead, as it will be part of the circuit that would carry any potential fault current under a fault condition.
Yeah, so we're not saying that because you've got 80 mil worth of steel there, you then have to put an 80 mil fly lead. No,
because the 80 mil comes from the fact that steel and copper have different resistivity.
Yeah.
And in comparison, it takes 8 mil of steel to be the equivalent of 1 mil of copper.
Okay. Hopefully that's answered that for you, Kieran. Two three-phase boards, 20 mil apart, fed from 2 different substations. What's your opinion?
Don't see a problem. Not where there's, the installation complies with BS 7671. We don't even, to comply with the regs, require a voltage warning label. Unless UO is greater than 230. I mean, a 3-phase installation, it won't be. So we rely on basic installation of circuits and enclosures. So I don't think there's a departure from the regulations there at all. Quite common in substations where you've got 2 feeds supplying a substation. So not sure exactly where the question's coming from, but I don't see a problem.
Yeah, certainly no problem. Like I say, labelling may be afforded to either board to make sure that or both boards, should I say, to make sure that people are aware that they're fed from 2 different places.
Yeah, so points of isolation, etc., would obviously be a requirement. It's nice to put some danger warning labels up. No, not always a requirement of the regs.
What are your guys' thoughts on AFDDs? This potentially will bump up the consumer change upwards to £1,000. It's difficult at times to get clients to RCBOs. Sean, again, we've already mentioned about the draft for public comment. If this is something you think could have an impact directly on your business or other businesses that may be operating in your area, again, just simply log on to the BSI standards development. You can go in there, comment on it, and stress your concerns about AFDDs. AFDDs are another safety device. They do have benefits, and nobody can sort of deny that, can they, Richard? And it's, they do a job.
They're an enhanced fire protection method, so against electrical faults.
Yeah, so that's another safety measure to put into a property. If they work and they do what they say they do, then great. But I can understand your frustration in that they're going to cost, upwards of £1,000 when you start to look at changing consumer units in people's properties. And going forward in new builds as well. You know, we can certainly sit here and talk about them till the cows come home, but with the draft for public comment, if we put a comment in as NIC, EIC and Alexa, that only counts as one person. That's why it's really important that you, as electrical contractors, do go on there and voice your opinion as well, to say, actually, these are a great safety method. However, the cost at the moment doesn't justify them being bumped up in the regulations.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The more comments that are received, the more effect that will have on the direction of the regulations.
Just a little bit off subject. You was on JPEL, wasn't you? So they're the committee that sit around and write the regulations.
Yeah, it was a few years ago. Yeah.
And how did you find that in terms of when this sort of thing came out? So draft for public comments, and how did that work out? You know, when you were sitting there debating about the comments that came in.
Well, obviously there was different Obviously, the JPEL committees are represented by all parts of the industry. So obviously there were representatives from ourselves, from NAPIT, from the cable manufacturers, from BEMA, etc., and all sort of interested parties. All different parties have different agendas, so to speak. So obviously ourselves and the ECA and people, we were, concerned about the effects on the contractor. And at the end of the day, it's most of it is driven from Chandelier and European directives, and we have an obligation to include technical content within our regulations. Mm. So there are different factors there, which is why obviously opinions do count, and the industry opinion that you guys out there does count, and can have an effect on the final version of the regulations.
Okay. Charging point, EV charging point on TT should be installed away from extraneous conductive parts which are at TNCS potential, correct?
Yeah, there's a little bit of information on this in Amendment 1 in Section 722, talking about exposed or extraneous conductive parts connected to a PME earthing system. The way I understand it, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, these parts would be subject to diverse neutral currents. Mm-hmm. Diverse neutral currents flowing through a conductor, whether it be an extraneous water pipe or something, will have an effect on step voltages around that part. And obviously that could create potentials between different parts. So I believe that the amendment, the annex in the amendment, talks about a distance of, I think it's 8 meters from any extraneous or conductive parts. The guidance is based on the earthing standard, BS 7430. Mm-hmm. So obviously, if people are interested, there's more information in that standard. Mm-hmm. There's lots of different factors: soil resistivity, current flows, etc. But obviously, there is a slight risk of potential there that emanates from an exposed or extraneous conductive part.
Okay. Thank you to my partner who's actually keeping me up to date with the scores, because no one else seems to be too bothered about it. I'll just leave it down to Katie to sort
it's
out.
Terrible. You just can't get the staff in.
I know. I asked for everyone. There's about 120 odd people in here, and no one else has kept me up to date.
People can't keep you informed, mate. It's not good enough.
It's not. No. Next question then. 2 office blocks. DNO Supplies enters one building, and there is a submain to the second office block. Where the earthing arrangement is TNCS and there are extraneous conductive parts in that building, is it acceptable for TNCS arrangement to be exported to the second building?
Without more information, I believe so. There's no specific area in BS 7671 other than in special locations, that forbids a TNCS or PME earthing conductor. So if both buildings are suitable, then the answer would be yes. Obviously, you would have to consider the bonding in both buildings.
That's going to be the big
supply from the other.
That's going to be the big factor, isn't it?
The bonding in the second building would need to be the same size as the bonding in the first building. That can sometimes cause some issues in the fact that you would need to take possibly, depends on the supply parameters, but a larger CPC out to the second building because you're basing it on 543 CPC and 544 bonding conductor. But in principle, I don't see why you can't. There's nothing specific in the regulations if it's just a standard building.
Okay, hopefully that's cleared that up for Jake there. Somebody's asked here, how important is the role of the electrical clerk of works in today's industry? I'm not too familiar. I don't think there's that many about. I may be wrong. There may be some on large sites, but certainly when I was an apprentice, they started to seem to phase out. Have you heard of anything, Richard? I don't think.
Well, interestingly enough, and I don't get this very often, I had an email today from the clerk of works. I mean, I think he worked for a local authority. They tend to be, I believe, in the more well-established, organisations, and it's something that was certainly quite common going back quite a few years. But the role seems to have died out a little bit these days. You get conformance officers now and things like that, don't you? They tend to have different titles these days.
Yeah,
and I may be doing the same function.
Yeah, I think they sort of spread themselves across all of the trades and sort of oversee everything, opposed to just purely on the electrical side of things.
Yeah, but I mean, as a role, the clerk of works to me would be very important. Where we're used for maintaining standards.
Definitely. Somebody's asked here. Good evening. I'd like to do the fire alarm course with NIC, EIC. Any guidance where to start, please, as the trainings are a little limited these days. Ali, I know that we are trying to make all of our courses virtual. That some of them have made it to the shelf a bit quicker than some of the others, as it were. Please do bear with us. Again, it is quite difficult to get training out there. Keep an eye on the website. Also, you might want to just put a inquiry in just to let them know that you're interested. Again, if there's enough numbers, they may be able to do it virtually. And also, once the classrooms start to open up again and the demand is there for training, I believe they'll start taking on more people for the courses. I came across a lighting circuit without a CPC. I advised the customer it needs rewiring before I fit her crystal chandeliers. I'm not sure if that's a question or it's a statement.
I think this is a topic that's quite commonly talked about, and I'm sure it's been covered on other sessions.
Do crystals conduct? That's what I want to know.
Is it class 1?
Let's look at it a bit more pragmatically. Then we'll say that it is a class 1 light fitting.
Okay, well, it's something obviously we would recommend initially. I think our best practice guide number 1 talks about this, so I'd certainly recommend that. It talks about a risk assessment process in whether the chandelier is simultaneously accessible with any other extraneous or conductive parts. There is one other solution that's not bandied about too often, and it certainly could be applicable for one item of equipment, and that would be electrical separation and an isolating transformer. Again, there's a lot of issues there in practicalities and stuff like that, but it's something that could be considered where there's no other sort of easier options, and where someone really wants something. If this was an expensive chandelier that the customer was insisting was connected up. So yeah, so I think best practice guide number 1 would probably be the best information we could say to someone for lighting circuits without CPCs.
Okay, someone else has asked a very similar question, so hopefully that's covered that one as well. Regarding the private rented sector scheme, once we give an unsatisfactory report and the landlord or letting agent just sits in the report and not doing the remedials, is there going to be some system where you can register the report unsatisfactory so the local authority knows there is an unsafe property? With a gas test, the tenant gets a copy with the EICR and the landlord doesn't. This may help the tenant know the state of the installation, so they would be able to complain also. You can. I don't believe there's anything we can do in terms of, as electrical contractors, in terms of pushing them through. You can have that conversation with the tenants if the tenants are present. You can say, look, this is unsafe. I want to draw this to your attention. If you do draw it to their attention, then they can start pushing their landlord. Is it 28 days to get the remedials done, isn't it, Richard?
What I would say, Jake, is that it is the landlord's responsibility under those regulations to report an unsatisfactory installation to the local authority, and where the remedial work is not completed within 28 days, again, is their responsibility to inform the local authority as to the reasons why it's not been completed. And obviously there can be some genuine reasons occasionally, as well as some non-genuine reasons.
I think the angle that he was going at, Rich, was that just because we've passed the landlord an unsatisfactory, how do we know that them works are getting completed? Is there any way that we can then check that them works have been completed if they did if they did employ a different electrician, or they didn't get the remedial works done?
Well, again, the people controlling this are the local building control, local authorities. I think it's environmental health. I'm not sure, one of those departments. So. And if you read the Act, the onus is completely on the landlord to provide that information to the local authority. I suppose the only thing that could be done would be to bring it to the local authority's attention, maybe, if there were an issue. This certainly could be done by the tenant, I believe, certainly where there's a safety issue, and it would be down to them. Obviously, it is a law, it is enforceable, and there are big fines to landlords who don't comply with the law. So, that's the carrot to get things done. So I think really for the control of this legislation, it's really, the local authority are the police, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully that's cleared that up for you, Jason. If it hasn't, then please do drop us a message if you want to talk about it in a bit more detail. No RCD at all in an installation. C2, who doesn't use an electric mower, strimmer, or ever run an extension lead outside? Thoughts?
Well, yeah, certainly outside use. There's been a requirement. I did a bit of research not so long ago, and I actually traced it right the way back to the 15th edition. Mm-hmm. So it's been a requirement for outside use for a long while. It certainly was a requirement under the 16th edition, and it certainly obviously still is a requirement. So traditionally, outside the potential zone, potentially dangerous, C2. That is probably the most common one. Again, I appreciate it can be difficult for the inspector. He's got to make an assessment of that installation, where he believes there is outside use. The comments made, where it's ground floor and there's a garden or a driveway, people are going to use equipment outside, aren't they? So those are probably easier than some of the other installations where maybe it's on the first floor and you start getting to a decision where can someone throw a lead out the window, those type of situations.
9 times out of 10.
Tricky.
9 times out of 10 they do, but yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we got here. What is the correct procedure when you FI I believe he's talking about an EICR. In terms of procedure, I guess he wants to know what the outcome is.
Okay, further investigation should be used where you believe there is a potentially or immediately dangerous item, but at the time of the inspection, firm. So it may be something that is outside the scope of what you've been asked to do, or it may be because there's an operational limitation at the time of the inspection and test. The outcome will be unsatisfactory with an FI and remain unsatisfactory until that further investigation takes place to identify whether there is any potentially or immediate dangers. So whoever the client is, it will be their responsibility, either from the person who carried out the original inspection test or another party, to further investigate the issue to determine whether there is any danger.
Okay. I think a few people are trying to troll me now. Everyone's saying it's 0-0, 30 minutes, still 0-0 and it's dull. Someone said 1-0 penalty. I don't know which ones to believe now. I've set up a trap, haven't I, for the score. Couple more questions then before we wrap it up. Hopefully I might even get in to be able to watch the second half.
You need to wrap it up to see the end of the game.
Yeah. Does changing attendance require a new EICR?
Under the private rented sector, no. It's a minimum of 5 years. It is recommended that landlords' checks are carried out on change of tenancy to ensure the installation is still in a good condition. There's no DIY electrics damage, etc., etc. But under the private rented sector legislation, there is no requirement for an EICR on change of tenancy.
Okay.
There's some very good guidance on the electrical Safety First website with the landlord's guide, and it certainly gives guidance on landlord's checks, etc., etc.
They're still going.
So exactly.
They're still going. They say it's 2-0 own goal, saying 3-0 off with the ref. I know you're just messing around now. Cheers though, Matt, for the laugh. Appreciate that. What jobs are acceptable to show when being assessed for domestic installer?
Domestic jobs.
I think in terms of what could he show?
Well, certainly it would require an electrical installation certificate. It would need to include, obviously, design, function, construction, inspection and testing. So I believe now we don't accept changing the consumer unit because there's no or very little design there. So certainly rewire, partial rewire, extension, that time, a reasonably sized electrical installation job.
Okay, same sort of question then, but on the side of commercial, somebody's asked, do I have to do commercial work in order to go to approved contractor, or is domestic and EICR work sufficient? He doesn't do too much commercial work.
No, you don't have to do commercial work to be an approved contractor. But obviously, if you do, we would want to see a sample of it. There are many companies, typically, let's say, for instance, those in the new build industry, who are approved contractors and do only domestic work. So as an approved contractor, the engineer would expect to see the range of scope of the work undertaken by the business. If that is only domestic work, then that would be acceptable.
Yeah, I think the angle that a lot of people are trying to go at the minute, Rich, is in and around this PRS side of things. They want to get into that type of work, that EICR work, but it's easier to go to approved than it is to try and go through all the other paths to get the bolt on for the EICR and PRS stuff.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if they're doing EICRs, then that would be covered by the approved contractor scheme, and it would need to be seen and assessed at some point.
Yeah.
But you know, it's really about the work the company undertake. And so that would be part of the assessment process, looking at that range of work and having a fair sample based on that range of work. So if a company is doing the ICRs and they want to go down the approved contractors route, then obviously that would be one method of doing it, but they would need EICRs as part of their assessment to show that.
Yeah. Rightio. Let's start wrapping things up then, Richard, because we're starting to creep over our allotted normal time. Thank you for the laughs tonight. I appreciate that, especially when we're talking about the football. Hopefully some of the questions that people have been posting have enlightened you and gave you an answer to a question that you thought in your head at some point. So hopefully that's, well, let's just say hopefully you had some school time this evening. Myself and Richard, thank you for joining us. We will be back next Monday with another webinar, another Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitter, whichever platform we seem to be on now. There is no webinar this week, however there is a webinar the following week. So it'll be on a Wednesday again at 8 o'clock. It's going to be about EICR coding, so if you guys want to join us on there, we would do appreciate it. If you do have any photos in regards to coding, you can email us those, or you can post them to our social media platforms with a little scenario just describing what it is. Then we can have a little chat on the webinar about it. But for now and tomorrow and whenever, we look forward to seeing you again next Monday. Please do stay safe and take care. From me and Richard, thank you very much.
Good night.